stand next to him, please, if you don't mind, in the center. Center, lady. In the center, please. A little to your left, please. Wonderful. And could you look over here, too?
And back here, please.
And center.
Is it the wrong time to say I evidently?
Back here,
Is
please.
it the wrong time
Center,
to say?
please. Center.
And over here, please.
And back here, please.
To live here. That was nice.
We love movies.
we love
We
the
live
city.
and breathe movies.
Thank you, Toronto Film Festival. It is a wonderful, wonderful place to come as a filmmaker.
I love the movie. If you want to talk about it after, I'll be walking around, probably around Chinatown or whatever.
Enjoy the film, guys, and thank you again, and thank you for having us. It's so great to be in my home country of Canada. Thank you, thank you.
Our moderator for today is Johanna Schneller, and it's now my pleasure to welcome the panel for the film Brain on Fire.
Oh, m'lady.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the TIFF press conference for Brain on Fire. Today, we're really lucky to have with us the director of the film, Gerard Barrett, his star, Chloë Grace Moretz, the writer of the book upon which this story is based, Susannah Cahalan, and the real-life doctor who helps Susannah, Dr. Sahul Najjar. So welcome all very much. I'm going to ask everybody a question to start, and then we'll throw it open to the panel. So, Susannah, I'm going to start with you, since the whole thing started with you. I'm sure that everybody here has seen the film, but for the people who haven't, tell us a little bit about the story of what happened to you.
Sure. This was when I was 24 years old. I had just started a career at the New York Post, just graduated from college. Everything was very new and exciting. And then things quickly fell apart. I started behaving in ways that I didn't recognize as myself. I felt out of control, and from there escalated very quickly, and I started experiencing hallucinations and paranoia, and from there even devolved even quicker. But I will leave that to the movie to tell the rest of that story, I think.
And were you able then, when you wrote a book about your experience, talk just a little bit about dredging up what you could remember and what it was like to sort of report on your own life.
Right, so the disease itself affects the brain in a way that makes memory impossible. So most of that time is lost to me. So I actually had to use kind of skills as a journalist. I'm a journalist by trade. And I had to use those skills to uncover, a lot of that time and relying on other people's recollections. So a lot of those feelings and kind of, I couldn't access because they weren't there to begin with. So it was an experience, a journalistic enterprise, really.
So as if you were writing about someone else.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really interesting. And Gerard, where did you come into the picture?
My agents in WME in Los Angeles sent me the book. It came from Charlize Theron and her company, and they'd seen my film Glassland, and they obviously reacted to that in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, I read the book, and it was amazing. It was a very interesting experience reading it, because it's very scary, but it's also very exhilarating from I suppose, a storyteller's point of view. And I just kind of, I sat back and I just kind of said, you know what, it's very rare that you get to, make a film that will probably save a life. And I think by putting this film out there and dealing with the disease and talking about the disease and highlighting the disease, I think ultimately it will save a life in some way, shape, or form. Like, Susannah's book has saved many lives, I'm sure. And I think, there's a greater good in it. And that's what really attracted me to it,
Chloe, how about you? What pulled you into the story?
I mean, it's the role of a lifetime to begin with. You get to kind of break a lot of stereotypes that surround people with illnesses. I think Susannah Cahalan is someone who is such a character of strength, someone who can overcome anything, truly. I mean, you see someone who had so much taken away from them, but at the same time, she is so evolving constantly. Even from when we first started talking to now, she's kind of even taken this movie as part of a way to learn even more about what had happened. And so when I read the book, and when I read the script, and then when I spoke to Susannah, it just felt pertinent to me that this movie was made for a multitude of reasons. And I think above all, it's more than a movie about illness. It's a story about labeling and mislabeling and misunderstanding, and how far a misunderstanding can go, and how people need to look farther than the books, because no human is just a book.
That's beautifully put. Dr. Najjar, there's some interesting stuff in here about the medical establishment. It's, tendency toward medication as the answer, and toward having an answer or not being able to have an answer, what happens there. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel seeing the medical establishment portrayed on screen, and then a little bit more about your role?
Yeah. Obviously, I have not seen the movie yet. I'm excited to see it with my family tonight. But let me tell you about not medical establishment. I'm one of those physicians taking care of patients every single day. There's a tremendous, what I refer to, gaps between multiple disciplines, specifically psychiatry and neurology, immunology, and rheumatology. And there are a lot of gaps, clinical, academic, educational gaps among those fields. We don't treat the patient sometimes as a whole. We treat symptom and disease, and we forget that behind that symptom, there's a human being here. We need to learn to treat the patient as a whole. And more importantly, we talk about diagnostic testing, the sophistication of the technology, but at the end of the day, there's nothing replaces the clinical history. Nothing replaces sitting, not standing in front of the patient. Just sit next to the patient on patient's bed. Treat the patient as a human being. And very important, emphasize it to my students, residents, and even my colleagues, that we've got to listen carefully to patients and their families so we do not miss important diagnostic clues often hidden in their stories. Indeed, that's what happened exactly to Susannah. The first meeting when I met Susannah through her boyfriend back then and now husband, and through her mom and dad, I got tremendous history because disease started before she showed up in the hospital. A few weeks earlier, when she had the flu-like symptoms, had this unusual bedbug sensation involving her left side of her body. That's when the disease started. And that was the first clue to me, that this is actually neurological. Now, to face the establishment and to change their mind, it is very difficult for two reasons. Not only they do not want to accept it, but the reality, we're having somebody who have overt psychiatric symptoms, agitated, sometimes attacking nerves. A few times, Susannah ran out of the floor. She has to be on one-to-one. They require a lot of psychiatric care. For me to go and say, this is a person with neurological illness, and keep her on the floor, that's a huge challenge. And honestly, I felt I'm under pressure at this point. I'm the last person to show up to rescue, basically, Susannah. And if I write her off, like everybody else, then either Susannah locked up permanently in psychiatric unit or having permanent neurological psychiatric sequelae. She was on verge to have really permanent psychiatric and neurological deficit and potentially facing death. That's the phase Susannah was in.
Yeah, so you really came in the nick of time in her life. Yeah. Gerard, you do a great job of showing that relationship that Dr. Najjar had with Susannah, having him sit on the bed, having him look her right in the eye. How did that come about? Did you?
I think it was just conversations with Susannah and reading the book and speaking to Dr. Najjar. He clearly has a different way of dealing with patients, and I think that was very apparent. And I think that that's what I definitely wanted to highlight with him, was that he was different. And sometimes it takes someone different to come in and save you, you know? And I think if we ever, anyone in this room or anybody watching, or including ourselves up here, if you ever found yourself in that situation, you'd hope somebody like him would come along and think different, you know what I mean? And that would look at it and kind of go, you know what, maybe it's not this, because, you know, a pill isn't the answer for everything, you know? And they like their pills in America, you know? So it's kind of...
We have a lot of quick fixes.
Yeah, but I think, you know, so it's kind of... So for me, what was really important for me making this film was just being honest, respecting Susannah's story, respecting the illness, respecting the people around Susannah, and respecting the people around the world that have gone through this and are going through this. So, you know, I didn't want to hijack this film with my own creative vision, and, you know, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel making this film, like, cinematically. I just wanted to tell the story and just be honest with the story. And hopefully, as I said, you know, when I read it, I just said, look, I hope this saves a life, you know?
So yes, the way it works is put your hand up, we'll get you a mic, and then go ahead right here in the front row.
Good morning or afternoon. Bruce Kirkland, Toronto Sun Media. By the way, if the next time I get ill, I want you as my doctor, or someone with your way of thinking. And I think you tell the story of why this film needed to be made. But I have a question for Chloë and Susannah, because they had to collaborate. In years of covering films, I've met many actors who talked to people who they were playing because they got wonderful detail and information, but you don't remember what happened to you. It's a different kind of memory because you investigated it. I'm curious if that created an interesting dynamic between the two of you, trying to come to what a film considers the truth.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, when you were so when we first met, we met on a phone call.
Yeah,
and
FaceTime.
And I was immediately just completely taken with the level of questioning that Chloë had, and many of which I couldn't answer, really. Did you get that sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I really wanted to find out who Susannah was, you know, and how real all the relationships that, you know, I had read in different interviews and different things about where she was in her life prior to the anti-NMDA kind of taking hold of her. I really wanted to figure out who she was, and a lot of the questions I asked, she was, you know, she would kind of sit there and go, well, you know, I have puzzled together a lot of pieces that people have told me, and there is stuff that there are black spots. Yeah. And so we were just talking about this earlier today, is that it's funny for her to watch the movie and to kind of, the idea that our worlds are kind of melding, and some of the realist depiction of that time that she has visually is the movie.
Yeah, some of my memories now are actually of Chloë doing the things.
Which is
wild. Bizarre.
And she was on set during some of the most crazy scenes we had to film.
But how do you think I feel? Because I'm looking at two of everyone up here. It's very odd. It's very odd. It's very odd.
And we look a lot alike. We were talking about that. It's crazy.
It's very strange, definitely.
Susanna, do you remember much about your life before the illness, or is that also, so you have all of that and then the illness is the blank?
There's just about, I would say, a couple months of blank, just blank. Maybe a few glimmers of things that are very unreliable, but mainly blank. However, in the process of recreating, in the process of watching a movie about your process of recreating, I've created a lot of false memories too. So.
Did making the movie or writing the book make you remember anything? Is there anything that sort of flooded in?
The way that the disease works, and Sue Elle will be able to speak of this far better than I, but it affects the hippocampus in the brain, and that is the kind of long-term storage of memory, so it's not there. It's never going to come back. And I think, you know, I have memories of Sue Elle drawing, you know, asking me to draw a clock. I have memories, but I'm watching it. It's not my memory, you know, so they're not real memories anymore.
There were few moments when the first time I met with her, and I have to spend some time and sit, you know, in the bed and talk to her. And I remember that time specifically when I bent forward in her bed and held her hand, and I told her that I'm going to get you through it, something of that nature. I know for maybe a minute or so there was really connection despite global cognitive impairment, lack of awareness where she is, who she is, like a totally different person. But I was talking to Susannah who was entrapped within her own body. And almost I could see that connection to the point I get her to do, with repeated attempts, the clock drawing test.
That part of the movie, by the way, is the part that made me cry. Because I think it was like a time that, there was just a moment that saved my life that I have no memory of, and it was almost like a gift being able to see that, you know, that moment.
And you know what, that's very interesting because I can't wait to see the movie myself because I know it's gonna bring up a lot of emotions I filed away, and one of those emotions, that emotion.
Take tissues. Definitely take tissues. There was a question in the front here.
Hi, Chloë Grace, moviemusme.com. My first question is to Ms. Moretz, in a way that I just came back from the screening, and I wonder, did you ever took the story personal? Because in some sense, I felt that was the case because, especially when it was a Dr. Ryan and he said like, oh, it's alcohol or everything, but like, please come on, just stop. So that's a question to you and also to Dr. Najjar. Thank you so much for doing this. It's very important. And when is it that you really realize that's a disease that you've been talking about, like that you found that helped to cure Susannah? And the question is, I'm sorry, I'm asking too much question. Okay, I'm good. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, what was yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, you know, we were talking about this today, on how this movie really does this whole story really speaks more about labeling, and how it is so easy to look at a young woman who lives in New York, who's working as a journalist in the New York Post, and say, you know, you have a glass of wine every night, you go out on the weekends like most New Yorkers do, you know, you're obviously writing yourself too hard and you're having a mental breakdown. You know, it's so easy to say that someone just can't, you know, compensate with life, and that's their issue there, and especially as a young woman, you know, it's kind of something we're used to, and you kind of see that in the movie where, you know, she's going, no, I know myself, I know who I am. Her boyfriend's saying, I know who she is, and she's never acted like this before. The New York Post stood behind her because they noticed that she was 16 years old, and they kept saying, you know, they didn't fire her. They didn't go, you know, oh, go home, you're psychotic. They called her family, and they said, something's wrong with the Susannah. We know it's not Susannah anymore. And that just, you know, is something we really want to highlight and make very realize is that it's, you know, not everything is as it looks, and you can't just point a finger and say you know what's going on with someone until you really, really look deeply into the person and the whole story, not just a little bitty piece of it. So, yeah, that was very pertinent and important to us.
The other thing, if I might add, because I've been there and I've seen her family, one person, and really have to give him a lot of respect, is back then her boyfriend, now her husband. I bet you so many boyfriends will be running away by clear mind.
Seriously.
I know.
Nobody could enter that room, neither nursing staff, nobody. Indeed, the rounds was made outside the room. To see her the way she was, and he loved her so dearly, he was there for her. That's something she knows, but she doesn't remember. To watch this, to the point, you know, when she did well and so forth, and I know they're planning to marry. And I told Susannah, I will never miss your wedding for the world. And what happened, that when the invitation made and the date made, I have already commitment to be in Germany to give a talk about autoimmune encephalitis with other experts in Berlin. I didn't know what to tell Susannah. It was like 2 days apart. So we went there, and it was like on mission. So the system, the Northwell Health System, want to get me back to attend her wedding. I know I'm going to miss the ceremony, but I just made it to the reception. They have to get a lot of connections. If one connection delayed by 1 hour, 2 hours, done, the whole thing. I give lectures, I give the symposium. Next day running, make a couple of connections, and I actually made it to the reception. The system and my nursing staff and my colleague, where are you now? Where exactly? They're tracking it to make sure that I make it. This is how much important. If anything came out, I love her dearly. She's a true hero. And she's the one who really, through her stories and through her book, touched many hearts, including my heart. and saved so many lives. And as I always said, she's become the voice or for many people throughout the world inflicted with autoimmune encephalitis who cannot advocate for themselves. It's truly an honor to be her doctor. It's a privilege.
This guy's
I
the
love
hero.
her dearly, and what an inspirational person. And I'm here to support her because she's really the true hero.
Well, that was the thing as well when, speaking to Suel and Susannah about him, was that he clearly is an emotional person, and I think that was one thing that I really wanted to bring across in the film, was that he's different. And I think, he's not cold for sure,
I think that
And
was
he
a key
listens,
part, at least in my diagnosis, was the fact that he listened to not only to me, but to my family. And was, that was very different as well.
To acknowledge that you were in there.
Yes.
Even though, that you were there, and it
Totally.
was about getting you out. So, I mean, that was the beautiful thing about it.
Question here?
I think anyone can really understand what it means to be misunderstood and labeled. Obviously, I could say that I'm put on a pedestal and I'm seen above all, but, I think every person's story is true to themselves, and, that's I don't ever want to separate myself from the group because my labeling and my misunderstandings, they're just as real and just as serious as anyone else's. So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to have someone pick apart everything you say, but that's why this movie can hopefully crack people's minds open and tell them to stop just judging and taking someone for something they're not when you don't even know who they are.
Chloe, can I just tell you something? I was labeled. I was in third grade, and I know Susannah knows the story, and I don't know if my wife told you about it or my parents when they visited. By third grade, I was labeled as, retarded kid, kicked out of Catholic school. That's why I don't attend church that much, but I pray always, every single day. And, they told my parents, your son, to my dad specifically, is not educable, and education is not for everyone. Please teach him a trade. Actually, he took me that summer because he's a carpenter and contractor just to try me. It didn't work for him even this way. And it took one person from public school to believe in me and to give me a chance. And that person wrote me and took care of me and tried to rehab my morale that was so broken. And I felt at that time I just want to do it for her. And maybe through her I could eliminate that stigmatization that I'm retarded, I'm dumb, I'm worth nothing. I was going from class to class every Friday for a year, standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall, and they have horns on my head, standing on one foot. That's what I was treated. So the world labeled me, including I love them dearly, my parents, because they follow the system, the Catholic system.
And you would say that probably inspired the way you do your clinical care, I think, definitely, yeah.
To look above.
Yeah.
Gerard, can you talk a little bit about, a lot of this movie relies on a visualization of something that's going on inside of someone's brain.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult. So can you talk a little bit about the ways you decide to make her breakdowns not just visual, but also audible?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the biggest challenges, was not, hijacking the film from a selfish creative point of view. I mean, there is without doubt scope here for a director to come in and let's go into the brain, let's go behind the eyes, let's have it all POV and whatever. But I think for me, the story is just too important, and the disease is too important, and everything around it is too important, and the themes are too important to hijack that with a style that would be distracting, So for me, I just wanted to tell the story. I wanted to put the audience, the camera's always quite away from her, so we're kind of experiencing it through a co-worker, another patient in the hospital, fly on the wall type of thing. And I think, I relied on, I remember I spoke to Susannah about sounds and stuff like that and all that. And, I relied on, sound design to take us there, and I also relied on the actors and to take us where we needed to go on a very visceral, real way, because it's just too important, It's too important to, and look, whether people will like that or not, that was a decision I made, because, the most important thing here is Susannah's story and how that is going to impact people. I mean, since I signed on to do this film, and I don't know how you deal with it, but like thousands of people reach out to me, whether it's through any social media, whether it's through letters, they find me, I don't know how, but it's like, there's a lot of this going on around the world. And I was telling Dr. Najjar as we were coming in the car, a person reached out to me recently, and her friend is trapped in a bed for the last 7 months, and she's trapped in a system where they don't recognize this illness, and she's on her way to a psychiatric hospital. So it's going on all the time. You were telling me a story about a girl recently in New York. So this transcends a film for me, and so I hope that, as I said, I hope it saves a life.
Chloë, you had a lot of big stuff to play. Obviously, I'm thinking specifically of the scene in the middle of the film where she breaks down in the newsroom. And it's almost like rapid cycling. It's like, I'm in despair, I'm ecstatic, I'm happy, I'm miserable, I hate you, I love you. Talk a little bit about how you calibrate that performance and how you felt at the end of every shooting day.
I mean, you remember, Gerard. I mean, we would just we would finish a take and we kind of look at each other and be what did we just do? I mean, because
we'd run it, we'd run the whole thing. So
it's almost like a blackout.
It was a very crazy experience.
It's as hysteric as it looks. I mean, you have to throw yourself into a state of psychosis that even if you're acting, your brain you're still throwing your levels up and down so much, and you kind of are spinning out of control, and it's kind of terrifying. And
we shot this film in like 17 or 18 days, so it's like
were long.
Did you go home and pull the covers over your head?
I did. I would just go home and sit with my dog. I remember, I used to say to my mom was like, do you want to go see a movie? And I was like, no. I just want to kind of sit and just think. I would just kind of process and say my name and remember who I am. And
do you worry about, because it's almost like you can't be too big with somebody whose brain is ill like this.
That's what I would ask. I would ask Susannah. I'd be like, how big was it? That's why I remember asking you that. I was like, was it as big as we'd want in a movie, or is that going too far? And I remember you told me a story where she said she remembers looking at, I think it was your editor, and she could age people. She could stare at them, and she thought she was godlike because she could literally make them age by 50 years in front of her eyes. Uh-huh. And I remember the idea that if that was possible in real life, then what couldn't we depict? Yeah. How far was too far?
But I also think as well, if you read the book, Susannah's all over the place, she's up, she's down, and Chloe's performance, it's like kind of an earthquake graph. It's up and down, it's up and down, it's up and down, and that's what we tried to do, we tried to portray that as real as we could, and so there's moments where it's really big, and there's moments where it's really small, but that was the fact that we were going on, and the research that we did, and we just constantly tried to stay to reality with this, and the truth. That was the main thing all the time,
Is there a question out there in the audience? Yes, Bruce?
Bruce Kirkland again. This obviously is not a major studio film. I can't imagine them doing it. How did this film even get made? Because it's precisely the kind of movie that we want to see at festivals, but not enough people are making them. How did this happen? And am I right in thinking this is a Canada-Ireland co-production?
It's a bit of everything.
Bit of everything.
Canada, Ireland, America. I'm sure there's some bit of South African in there as well. I'm sure. I'm sure there's everything in it. It just got made by just the will to make it. I mean, you came together nicely, But I think, we needed the freedom of. This is why independent film exists, you know what I mean? We needed the freedom to kind of do what we had to do and to tell the story honestly, and you never have enough, but we had enough to make this movie, and I just got on with it and dealt with it, and and just kind of got on with it. But I think, you know, as we said, you know, the mission was we were all there for love of the story and passion for why we want to do this. Some, you know, money is only energy. It gets people off their ass. You know, it doesn't make you do what she does, you know? So we just got on with it. We just got on with it.
Charlize Theron, she was a producer. Was this originally something she had thought about for herself? What was her...
No, but I'm sure back in her day, she'd not back in her day, but I'm sure back in her time, this would have been something that would definitely have. I mean, I think it's a fantastic.
Susannah was
role.
21 in real life, is what you mean by that.
I think I'm done now anyway. I think
it's a dream role.
I think no labeling, okay? So,
yeah,
no
it's a story about labeling.
No, but what I'm saying is, I think this is. Look, I think it's a beautiful part for somebody. At the beginning of their career, where, you know, it's kind of
it's a dream.
It's a beautiful part, and I think and look, I think, you know, movie making sometimes is really tough. It's really all about the commerce, you know. It's really all about the numbers. It's really all about those things. I mean, you know, sometimes you get a chance to work on something that, you know, I think we have some survivors coming tonight. I don't want to say survivors, but people that have gone through this illness. I mean, it transcends for me, you know. As I said, I think it's the only time I'll ever get to make a movie that'll save a life, you know. Hopefully, you know.
Susannah, for people who don't know the numbers, who haven't seen the crawl at the end of the movie yet, you were the 267th patient?
Very close, 217th person.
Okay.
Yeah, I probably should say the disease, a little bit about the disease, that's okay. So I was the 217th person to be diagnosed with what's called anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis. And the disease itself was named in 2005 and really, was described in 2005 and really named in 2007. And I was treated in 2009. So had that been prior to 2005, I definitely would not be sitting at this table here right now. So I got very, very lucky to, you know, it seemed like a harrowing journey, which it was, but many people out there face far more harrowing journeys than I did, and some of them are actually going to be at the premiere tonight. But it's a kind of testament to the fact that we need really pliable, interested doctors who are also listening and also, you know, reading up on the literature. You know, that's one thing that, well, not only is he an amazing listener and an amazing clinician, but he also is a researcher on top of that. So I really benefited from from that and getting to him as swiftly as I did.
How quickly after your recovery did you write the book?
So I was diagnosed in April of 2009, and I started writing the book a year-ish later. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I was still recovering while I was writing the book.
Okay. And since then, you estimate how many people might have...
Hard to say, because it used to be only one place in the world tested for this disease, and that's how I can get that number. But now it's commercially available tests, which is amazing. But it also means we don't know the numbers, right? I mean, thousands, definitely thousands.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have really true estimate of the prevalence rate, but I will tell you this is probably the most common form of autoimmune encephalitis. And certainly much more common than encephalitis caused by viruses such as, you know, herpes or chickenpox and so forth. Some estimates now maybe 4 times more common than actually typical viral encephalitis. And we were looking at it in certain age group like Susannah's age, but now we find it in toddler, in elderly, in man, in woman, but still more common in women.
And the young people get it. Is it just airborne or?
You know, so we call it autoimmune, so that means the person's own immune system actually attacking their brain. So they produce that antibody. The question, why they generate that antibody, so there are a lot of hypotheses about it. One of it is an autoimmune, is your body genetically determined to produce that antibody, but sometimes you may need a trigger. So now we know in some cases at least, herpes virus linked to some cases as a triggering factor to autoimmune, to anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. So there are issues. Some of us may be having low titers of the antibody, but asymptomatic because the wall that make the brain immunoprivileged, separate the brain from whatever is circulating in the blood is intact. But when that barrier is disrupted, they may allow harmful substances such as maybe low titers of antibodies circulating into the blood into entering the brain, and that can cause inflammation.
The cause is still unknown.
We're still learning.
There is basically you need a trigger. And in my case, I had enlarged lymph nodes in my spine, which leads many to believe, well included, that I probably had a flu. The flu was probably my trigger. So it can be it could be anything like that, but I had the genetic inclination to make these harmful antibodies that attack the brain.
But the one thing as well, that when I was speaking with Susannah before we made the film was, how many people throughout history were segregated from society, were told that they were psychotic when, and I'm talking about going back a long time, that were, that this could have been so easily diagnosed, but unfortunately, it was unknown,
Is there a question here? Yep.
This question is for Susannah. I'm very curious to know what your family says, your parents say that you have a film about what happened, and if you are also in touch with the female doctor that was the one that made the contact with the doctor, because she was really the one that doesn't want to give up about your case.
So the first answer is, how do my parents feel about the movie? Well, they have not seen it yet, so I hope for them to see it soon. But they're very excited. I mean, I think that they, in a lot of ways, have disconnected from this experience because it was very painful for them, and they kind of are like, okay, that's your thing that you do, In terms of the female doctor, that was actually not true to the book and true to my experience. That was something that was specifically for the movie. There was no female doctor telling you to get no? No. No. Yes.
Anybody else have a question out there? Okay, I will ask the wrap-up question then. I think one of the things the film does really well is sort of shows you the process that she had to go through in order for somebody, like a lot of steps along the way had to happen. And you guys as filmmakers had to fearlessly feel that the audience would stick with you through her downward spiral as it changed. Just talk a little bit about that decision and why it was important to you to show all the symptoms and all the ways in which she...
Yeah, I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that, people aren't going to turn up for like 10 hours, So you got to condense this into, 100 minutes. And how do you make it as entertaining as possible, yet educational as possible as well, and informing. So I think what we did was, we had to, without a doubt, show the audience what she was going through, because we had to take her down to bring her back up again. And I think, when we go to the hospital as well in the movie, we got to go through the medical process, not very detailed, but in a way where that it's accessible. I think accessibility is the key to movies like this all the time. How do we break it down so that, everybody and anybody can understand this and that they can understand the disease. So yeah, we were very careful about that and very careful about that in the editing process and the writing process. But I think, the goal was, how do we make this as accessible as possible, but truthful? That was the goal, and I hope we achieved that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming,
Thank you,
and
everybody.
thank you to the panel. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Best of luck.